welcome to the latest in the Leaders with Ambition podcast series. Today, I am absolutely delighted to welcome my guest, Becky Lowe. And Becky is the UK and International Head of Talent Acquisition at CMS. And today it's going to be a really interesting conversation, which sees, I think, this real authentic self that Becky has and that she brings into her everyday life, but it's particularly into her everyday working life, and how she really believes in developing other people. You know, she's incredibly passionate about coaching, mentoring, and we will go on to talk about some of the self-development that she's done as well. She's currently studying for her Mayor Campbell accreditation, and that's something I think that's been a big game changer for the way that Becky does view her work and her life. But also, I think with Becky, you'll see where constantly she's thinking about adding value. She's incredibly hardworking, focused and determined, and there's some very strong values which I think come from mum and dad back in the day. But without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Becky to bring her career history to life for you. Becky, over to you.
Thank you, Nikki. Wow, I'm not sure I can quite live up to that intro. That's huge.
All true, Becky. It's all true.
Where to start? I guess, like most people, I had a pretty normal upbringing. I lived in a very small village, went to a pretty small school, attended university at Staffordshire in Stoke-on-Trent. It was far enough away from home, but close enough for food parcels and help if ever I needed it. So yeah, quite a normal childhood, happy childhood. I did a degree.
Your parents, I know that your parents really did instill these values in you, didn't they? About this self-belief and this hard work will achieve what you wanted to do. And I think there was also quite a competitive spirit in you as well, because you're very sporty, aren't you? You definitely were when you were in your formative years.
Yeah, my mum had always played netball. My dad was less sporty, but my mum had played netball for most of her life up until she'd had me, and she'd ran for Manchester and done all sorts of volleyball as well. And so I'd always played netball throughout both club level and school. I think my parents instilled in me hard work, good values, a slightly competitive edge, but yeah, most importantly, a belief that I could do anything. If I put my mind to it and I worked hard and I applied myself, I could be anything, which was quite nice. I don't remember, it's quite funny, in those days, I don't remember, we talk about imposter syndrome now, but I don't remember having that as a child. It's funny how you change as you progress through to adult life. I'd say my parents were quite directing though. I think when I chose my university, I had my eye on the ball of the sporting facilities that were available at Staffordshire where I went. My parents were quite savvy, both business people, and the degree programs there had a year out in industry. I think my parents had the beauty of wisdom and could see that doing a 4-year program with a year in industry was going to benefit me. So I'd say that they were gently guiding, but because I think at one point I wanted to do ancient history, archaeology and anthropology. And I remember my dad saying to me, "Do you really want to do that?"
You can do that in your next iteration of life, can't you?
Absolutely. So, yes, I'm very grateful for their direction and also their belief in me. I think having had that support around me and that belief was critical at an early stage.
And so it took a year out, your year in industry, and you got a really interesting position, didn't you?
I did. I was incredibly lucky. I got a position with Chorus that was formerly British Steel. And initially, it was working with the graduate recruitment team. So doing a lot of graduate recruitment. So I've kind of come full circle because obviously one of the teams that I look after now is emerging talent. So all of our graduate and our apprentices within CMS. And then 6 months into the programme came the news about closing several of the steel plants, and they needed someone to help out with the sort of local HR teams, the team of HRBPs as we'd now know it, who were down on site to support them and the managers in going through a redundancy programme. And I'm not sure what possessed me, but they were looking for volunteers, and I just put my hand up and said that I would do it. And I think that's been a theme that's followed me throughout my career. Sometimes I don't tend to think about these things too much. I look at it and think, might try that on for a bit and see if it fits. And so I effectively had a placement of 2 parts, 6 months doing graduate recruitment and 6 months working with the team, going through a probably massive redundancy program, which was, was amazing. So very, very different sides of HR that I got to see really early on, which was
great exposure, that, wasn't it? And I think I also remember you mentioning that you worked, quite closely negotiating with the unions as well, which again, at that time in your life when you're starting out, is huge, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, at that point, you've taken notes in lectures, but you've not really got much experience of business note taking, let alone these very, very important trade union meeting notes that you need to do between what was effectively the different managing. There's different elements on a plant, and each area has like a managing very senior guy, because it was predominantly male back then as well. And then you'd obviously had the trade union reps. But again, there was 2 of the managers assigned to sort of the redundancy counselling team, and they really took me under their wing, and I got so much insight from them, so much support. Again, lots of encouragement, lots of development. So again, absolutely nerve-wracking experience. I think it's one of those things that at the time you can feel the butterflies in your stomach and it is nerve-wracking, and then you come away from it and there's this sense of confidence of, I did that, I can do this, and that learning as well, that sense of achievement.
Yeah, and I think you're right though, it's always looking for those opportunities. As you say, you put your hand up, and I know that you've done that throughout your career as well. So probably good advice for people listening today as well. And so you were in a very male-dominated area, as you say. Did you ever at any stage feel that it was any kind of sexism, or was it the case that people were respecting you as the fact that you were learning and developing and you were getting that support, as you mentioned?
I don't think so. I can't recall any sort of patronising or sexist behaviour. I think, remembering I was still very young at this stage. I was the equivalent of, obviously my 3rd year was out in industry, but I was the equivalent of a final year university student. So I think what they recognised in me was ambition. At that stage, I was also fiercely determined to prove myself. And so naturally, the HR team, the managers put their arms around me and kind of supported me. So I felt nothing but support. It is a really good question, though. I think I have tended to work in male-dominated teams and industries, and I sometimes do wonder how that has influenced my approach, my managing style, my leadership style. It's something that I have been very cognizant of, particularly in the latter years.
Which is, again, I think when you talk about this authenticity piece, it really does pull through, doesn't it? And I know we'll come on to talk about that a little later on as well in the conversation, when you really felt that you were bringing your true authentic self and how your career took off after that. So I'm looking forward to discussing that. So you went back and finished your degree, and then it was a challenging time, wasn't it, trying to find graduate, post-grad roles in the markets?
It was, and I guess in all honesty, I think I was slightly arrogant, and I learned a valuable lesson. I had sponsorship from Chorus to do my final year at university, and I thought it was in the bag that I was going to go back there and get a graduate position. And if I'm honest, looking back in hindsight, completely on me. I went into the assessment day very arrogant, not very well prepped, because I thought it was a done deal, and surprise, surprise, didn't get offered a graduate position. And I remember at the time thinking, oh my goodness, the world has fallen in. This is terrible. And I think my advice to anyone is these setbacks are so important. It's really important in your career to develop resilience. And I think early on I was able to do that from this and to learn from it, to not take anything for granted and to not make assumptions. So In hindsight, it was a really, really good thing to happen to me. So instead of going back to chorus, I went and did a stint in a startup in South Wales.
Completely opposite ends. You know, you've got one of the biggest companies ever to a startup. I love it.
I know. And we'd gone from heavy end steel manufacturing to telecom sales startup, which was the complete ends of the spectrum. And I guess that was great because coming from uni, I had all this theory that I was desperate to implement. And as a startup, they were keen to kind of let me play with that almost.
So a great opportunity for you, Becky, as well.
Yeah, working with two very dynamic leaders, a chairman and a CEO. So I did that for about a year, I think. And then the relationship that I was in at the time broke down, and I considered my options because I was in Wales still, South Wales, and I just didn't want to stay in South Wales. So I took the challenging decision to move home, because obviously when you've moved out of home, no one necessarily wants to move back. So I moved out of home.
Did mum and dad make you dinner and do your washing again when you were back home?
Yeah, I think they were pretty happy to have me back. I did go back home with a number of pets. I had a dog, I had a puppy, a house rabbit, and a hamster, as you do. So it wasn't just me going back home. It was this whole
menagerie.
Completely. And I think I took some time to recalibrate. I didn't want to jump into a permanent role, so I did some contracts. I did a stint in education, Norwich City College, helping them write their staff handbook, which was really, really great. And when that came to an end, I picked up a stint in local government, South Norfolk County Council. Again, really, really different. You've gone manufacturing, call centre, education, local council. That was great. I probably did more generalist HR work there, but also a bit of job evaluation, so job grading job roles, which was fascinating. And then I saw a maternity cover for a role in Cambridge with Mills and Reeve. And I'd always been interested in law. It did flit across my mind at one point whether I would pursue a career in law. And they were looking for a HR person to go in and do a maternity cover for about a year. So I went and joined Mills and Reeve and did that.
And you've stayed in professional services since, which we'll come on to discuss, which I love. But do you think actually having those different experiences and different exposure to different industries, and again, the amount of people that you're meeting, it must have helped accelerate you and your learning, because you do have to adapt, and the amount of stakeholders that you're liaising with, you're not just having, this is Becky's way, you're really thinking about what's best for the firm, what's best for the individual, and coming up with solutions, really, aren't you?
Absolutely. And I think sometimes, like everyone, I've got a tendency to downplay it and say, oh, I got lucky in my career. I was in the right place at the right time. And actually, I don't think that's true. I think I was so open-minded. And I know we talk a lot about open-minded, but I think it's really important from almost a selfish developmental point of view, that the more open-minded you are to trying different things on, to experimenting. I mean, I'm still experimenting in my career today, and I'm going to be 45 this year. The more benefit you're going to have, even if something doesn't work out, you will acquire learning from that. I mean, Stephen Bartlett, who wrote the great book, Diary of a CEO, who's also on Dragon's Den, he talks about failure rate in his book, and those organizations that tend to hit huge successes have had a higher failure rate. And I would stress my career hasn't been smooth sailing. There's been some bumps along the way, but they have been, valuable learning alongside the high points.
I love that. I love that, I know you're not scared of trying things. And one of your mantras is be brave, isn't it? And be courageous. Really, put yourself out there. And with that, of course you're going to fail. And that's how you learn. It's exactly what you're saying there. It's how you learn, isn't it? And using that experience positively. So I know that you, after your role that you were doing, you decided to move to different opportunity in London, still in law, but you were headhunted by a London firm, weren't you?
Yes. When I'd worked at Mills and Reeve, although I was based in the Cambridge office, I ran salary review during my time there for the whole firm. So I'd worked really closely with one of the managers in the Norwich office, which is great. I'd never done a salary review before. Again, complete learning experience.
Yeah. I bet you were there back with your exercise books going, oh, I need to remember how to do this now. I've got the theory.
Absolutely. And it was great. And it gave me exposure to working with like finance director, the HR director, other managing partners, some really important stakeholders, which, always builds your confidence. So that was a great experience. And then the manager in Norwich, she actually joined SJ Berwin, and she picked up the phone to me and said, I'm going to be recruiting for my team. How do you feel about coming and joining? And again, I'd never really, I knew of London. It was this big, scary city, but I'd never really entertained the idea of, I've visited on day trips and everything, but I'd never really entertained the idea of moving there. But and at the time it was difficult because Mills and Reeve offered me a permanent role following my fixed term contract, my maternity cover. And so I had to turn them down because my instinct told me that if I didn't go for this opportunity in London, that I would regret it. And I think that's the other thing that I'd probably share is trust your instincts. Most of the time, they're really going to serve you well. They're there for a reason. And normally they're good, good instincts.
Listen to that voice sometimes. Because I know you also, as part of some of your interim roles, you picked up on some mistakes that were happening in one of the firms, didn't you? Which had just gone unnoticed. And Absolutely. You were able to add such a massive value. And I think then also, again, that must have made you feel that you knew what you were doing in your career and that you had so much value to give, because you're all about adding value, aren't you, with your firms?
Yeah, there were, in the previous years, there'd probably been a couple of mistakes on the salary review that had then flowed through.
Yeah.
And I think one of my strengths, if I look at my StrengthScope profile, is attention to detail. And so when I had figured out how to run the data from the system and build my reward spreadsheet, I was then taking it home line by line in the evening and with my little ruler and checking it and manually checking on a calculator the pro rata element. And I did come across a couple of mistakes. There are a handful of mistakes. That's not being disparaging about my colleagues. It happens.
Yeah.
I have made my own mistakes in a reward review that I'm lucky another colleague picked up on them. When you're working long hours, you're tired and you're working with numbers, it's so easy to do. But yes, those were the most important thing is those were identified. We were able to correct them and we were able to move forward. But I think it was a really great moment for me because the senior leadership team had sort of spotted this and gone, wow, Becky, your attention to detail is excellent. And that's probably why, to a degree, I got offered a permanent role. So, it's not undervaluing those skills. I haven't always been the most outward gregarious person. I am now as I've grown in confidence. But, sometimes there are skills behind the scenes that, don't overlook them. They're really important. I love it in my team when people have attention to detail because, if they're watching their own work, but they're also watching my back.
Yeah, exactly. It makes such a big difference. And the mistakes can be huge, can't they? In law firms, you've got to be so careful, even more so. So you started working at SJ Berwin and again, you were developing your career, weren't you? And then really starting to own your career. And you decided, I'm ready for the next move.
I did. And I think I had some quite important advice given to me when I was at SJ Berwin. I remember the HR director taking me aside at one point and saying, Becky, we love you, but you're a little bit textbook. Who is you? Who is Becky? Bring all of Becky to work. And so I took that advice on board and stayed with SJ Berwin for a number of years and grew into a really, really strong business partner. I loved working with the partners that I did, but I was ready for the next step.
What great advice from a partner, somebody actually investing in you as well, to say, look, that authenticity needs to shine through, particularly if you've got a role like yours.
Yeah, and I'd worked with, and she was absolutely right. I'd worked with some of the, senior partners in corporate, and if I'm honest, looking back, when in HR, sometimes you're in a position where you're having to say no.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're a bit of a guardian of, we really can't do that. And I think what enables you to land that message is your personality, your ability to build a rapport, to build trust and confidence in you as a business advisor. So she was absolutely right in the advice she gave me. If I'd gone into some of those meetings where I had to say no, sounding like a textbook,
yeah,
I don't think it would have landed. So really, really lucky that advice was given to me at that stage in my career. And I think quite naturally, I outgrew SJ Berwin, and there wasn't scope for me to progress to the next level. I really wanted at that stage a manager role. And so I joined Ashurst at that stage, so another law firm.
Yeah.
Which was brilliant. I had my own practices that I looked after, as well as some areas of business services. And it was really great to be able to own areas, to be sort of the dedicated HR person. I'd had that at SJ Berwin, but I think when you get your first manager role, your mindset kind of shifts. You kind of sit up a little bit taller in your seat. So yeah, I think there was a bit of a shift for me when I joined Ashurst.
And when you were there, you were making changes, you were developing. But I think, one of the things that you've always done is try and grow your team with you, isn't it? Particularly getting into your management role now, you do like people to have personal development. And so that was, how did you start to change that round? Because as you were talking about this mindset change going into the management role.
I mean, I work really closely with the secretarial team leader for my areas, so looking at their development, what their aspirations were, and thinking of where there were gaps in their skill set. And also, I mean, I had HR advisors supporting me, so I'd work really closely with them, developing them. While I was there, I designed a secretarial competency framework, which was really valuable. We'd introduced one for the fee earners, but we hadn't introduced one at that point for the secretaries. But also beyond my team, I don't necessarily look at sort of talent and aspiration just in my team. So I worked with HR advisors outside of my team. There was an HR advisor who was working on the business services side, and she was really interested in transitioning to support the fee earning side from an HR angle. So I spent a lot of time with her. And I think part of development is really taking a step back and listening to the individual. As humans, I've learned that doing my coaching program, we're actually not that great at listening. I know I do it with my son. I'm like, yes, and I'm on my phone checking emails. But I think it's so important to take time out of the day job, listen to your team, what's going on for them, where are their aspirations, are their aspirations being met, what development are they looking for, and giving feedback, really giving timely feedback. So part of that was absolutely them talking to me about what they wanted, and part of that was me giving honest and frank feedback from time to time.
And I think your point there about being present is so important, because as you say, there's a million things happening these days. You've got Teams, you've got emails, you've got phone calls, WhatsApp, everything coming in. And it's about just going to that person, giving them your time and attention, and vice versa when you're being mentored or sponsored as well, for people to really recognise the importance of that. And as you rightly say, if people feel they're being listened to, they're much more likely to be open, or much more likely to be able to feel that they can share their ideas or business improvements. So that's what you want, isn't it?
Absolutely. And giving opportunities. The number of times I've said, right, you're going to lead that partner meeting, and they've looked at me and gone, sure. I'm like, yeah, I have belief in you. You can do this. I think sometimes when you're managing and helping others develop, you have more belief in their capabilities than they do sometimes. And so I'm not afraid to stretch people and take them out of their comfort zone, because that's the kind of support I've had, and that's what's enabled me to grow, is that belief of others in me. So it's something that I try and pay forward. Clear sponsorship. I'm very big on having sponsorship, particularly female talent.
And would you say then that the sponsorship, you feel that's more important than the mentoring, or is it a mix of both? Because they are so different, aren't they?
I think it's a mix of everything, if I'm honest. So mentoring is obviously putting in information, and that's really important because there's certain information that we all need to go about our working lives. Sponsorship, I've definitely had that from one of my leaders. I mean, that's about keep putting you in front of people. And I even had that in some of my other roles. There's been times where I've had a few wobbles and they've kept putting me back in that situation. And to me, that's clear sponsorship to enable me to crack it.
Yeah.
And then coaching. Coaching is so important. I mean, coaching is a belief that the individual has the resources within them to address their challenges, to meet their aspirations. And as a coach, all you're doing is going along the journey with them and helping them access that. So I think all three are important, and all three play their part in anyone's career.
At different times. I love that. And so you moved, as you were saying, you were working at Ashurst. I know that you really love your time there. It was very high performing culture as well, wasn't it? And you decided you didn't want to get pigeonholed.
Yes, I think I was really conscious that I'd worked in a number of law firms at that point, and I didn't want to do another law firm. And I'd always had a dream that I wanted to work for one of the big four accounting firms. And it was always EY. I always wanted to go and work for EY. I could not tell you why. It was something that I had, a visualization I had in my mind that I really wanted to go and work for EY. As it happens, I ended up joining PwC, where I headed up HR for business recovery services.
Big job.
Yeah. So when I started, there were about 800 people in that business unit, and that sat within the deals line of service. And that was everything in HR, from looking at their talent pipelines to doing my first really big comp and bonus round. I mean, it was huge there, to running talent conferences. We did some strengths while I was there. They were a great business unit to work for. Probably a slightly more maverick style, which I think suited me.
Right.
And I even did some client-facing work while I was there. I remember on a Friday, the resourcing manager who I work with quite closely came to me and said, "We've got this client situation on Monday morning, and we think that you might be good for this." And I've never done client-facing before. And again, well, okay, well, I'll give it a go.
That's amazing.
See how it works out.
Yeah, really, really good.
So Monday morning, I found myself in a discussion in one of our client rooms with the CEO and her board from a charity.
Oh, fantastic. And how did you feel that, you had a seat at the table? How did that make you feel, that someone had believed in you and actually then you were sat in a client-facing opportunity?
I think it was good. PwC are very good at that. If you do something once, then you're considered the expert, which took a lot to get my head around sometimes. But it was really nice. And I think getting the feedback from the client, I actually got great feedback from the client at the time. And it was an uncomfortable session, don't get me wrong. It wasn't easy. Yeah. I found it really challenging. I was working with them to design a new structure, which potentially could mean that not all of those roles would be present going forward. Right. And I had to get really uncomfortable with silence, because at the beginning, no one was saying anything. And I struggle with that. I can be someone who, when it's quiet, likes to fill gaps. Yeah. So my first professional experience of getting very comfortable with just forcing the silence until it got so uncomfortable that someone spoke, and then it opened up. So it was a really tough meeting. I was exhausted by the end of it.
I can imagine.
But then I got great feedback from the client, which was brilliant, as well as some areas for development. I am a big fan of, I've actually refused feedback that's all glowing before and asked someone to go away and write it again, because I, like everyone, want something constructive. I've got some great points, but I know I've also got some areas for development. So make sure you're giving me balanced feedback. So the client gave me constructive feedback as well. And I was able to look at that and go, yeah, actually, yeah, I can see that. Great, I can take that forward.
That's very brave as well, though. You know, like you say, lots of people don't want to do that, but lots of people just want the good stuff. They ask for feedback, but they only want it to be positive, and that's not going to help develop, is it? And what do you think is the biggest difference then between, you know, the law firms and the practice firms? What would you say, having worked in both, and, you know, the very bright people across all of those areas as well?
I mean, it's hard to say because it's been a number of years since I've been with the Big Four, and whilst I track them, I've not, you know, been working back in there. At the time, I'd say they were more progressive in terms of some of the development. When I was there, I became MBTI accredited. I worked with Gallup Strengths. There was a lot around development and talent management. And so in that space, they were more progressive. The very nature of it is accountants are going to be better at managing budgets, because that is their
job. Yeah.
That's their bread and butter. So it is slightly easier to get accountants to forecast. So, you know, I could say to the business, okay, if we're looking at this talent pipeline, what's coming down the line in terms of retirements, where have we got gaps in terms of who's coming through, or actually this is not meeting our diversity and inclusion strategic objectives. So it's easier, I think, or it was back then, for me to get them to forecast than it has been in my experience within the legal sector.
Yeah, which makes complete sense, as you say, doesn't it? And I think that's interesting also, just hearing about the fact that, you know, you wanted to have this ability to work outside of legal. And I know it's something you really, really enjoyed. I know you worked incredibly hard, as you always do, very long hours. And then you decided that you wanted to have a family and you needed to get a better work-life balance. And that led you to the next stage in your career, didn't it? It
did. And you know, don't get me wrong, I mean, I don't want people to think that you can only progress through working long hours. That was part of my choice. That's what energized me. I was fiercely ambitious, and I still am, but in a different way. But back then, that came out in hours, working long hours. And I'd be lying if I didn't say I stayed till 7 o'clock in the office and then I went for drinks, or I went to hot Bikram yoga. It suited my lifestyle. But I did 4 years at PwC, or just over 4 years, and my career was on a high, but I was at an age where I was thinking, do I want to settle down? Do I want to have children? And that time, again, someone approached me about a role with Nabarro, and being open-minded, I thought, why not go and have a chat about it? I don't have to push forward with it if it's not the right role, but let's at least go and have a conversation. And so I did. I had a couple of conversations with the HR director, as she was then, and also some of the senior partners, including the managing partner. I was very clear about my motivations for moving. I think it's always better to contract up front about expectations, so that there's no confusion down the line, and you can also establish if you're on the same page or not.
Important. That transparency, I think, is essential, isn't it? I agree. From both sides.
Absolutely. And they felt they could meet my needs. I felt I could give them. I had a lot to offer them as an organisation. So I joined Nabarro as the head of HR, which was exciting, and it was great. It was more money, but less hours. So I mean, I look back and think, wow, I was really lucky. I had a boss who had also been in the Big Four. I think it helps because she had been in the Big Four, so she kind of got where I was coming from, about needing to slow the pace down a little bit. And she would actively chase me out of the office at 5:30, saying, do you not have a cycling class or a yoga class? It's Thursday, isn't that cycling? You know, to have that. I think, you know, it's okay to have work-life balance, because we should all have work-life balance.
But it needs to be running behaviour, doesn't it? I think, which is so important.
And she did. She really taught me the importance of role modelling good behaviour, because she wouldn't sneak out of the office at 5:30. She'd make a big sort of deal about packing up her stuff and going, right, it's 5:30. Come on.
Yeah, that's great.
It was brilliant. And there were periods when we had to work long hours. So yeah, while I was there, I started a relationship. Everything was going really, really well. And then things changed quite considerably. I found myself unexpectedly pregnant around about the same time. We also announced the plans for the tripartite merger with CMS and Ofwat. That was huge. It just goes to show life throws you curveballs, and you're never quite sure what's going to come your way. And I think that's the most important thing about being able to, as a strong leader, you've got to be able to promote others. My boss at the time came to me, and one of my team had just come back from maternity leave, and it can be tough coming back from mat leave, and you've been out for a year. You're not quite sure where you're placed within the organisation. The organisation evolves a lot in the year that you've been away, and she wanted to go on the project team for the merger. And my boss, in a really consultative, great way, said, "How do you feel about that? Would you be okay?" And I was like, "Absolutely. I can cover off the other area." Obviously, there's a lot to go through when you go through a tripartite merger in terms of redundancies, unfortunately, and looking at the future headcount planning and everything. And so I was really, really happy to give one of my team that opportunity. And then I wasn't going to apply for a role in the merger. I think I felt guilt. Pregnancy had been unexpected, hadn't been planned. And it felt wrong somehow to be taking a role when I was going to be going off on maternity leave so quickly after sort of the coming together on the 1st of July of the three firms. And my boss queried why I wasn't applying for roles. I didn't want to do a head of HR role, and I didn't want to do it in a sort of a firm that had just merged. I don't know why. It just didn't the idea of it didn't make my heart sing. And she said to me, "Well, have you thought about specializing in recruitment, in talent acquisition?" And I looked at her and went, "Oh, nice. I don't know if that's really me." And then I went away and I thought about it, did some research, and thought about how I would implement a talent acquisition strategy in a newly merged firm. And as I was doing this research, I got myself more and more excited and was thinking, actually, I would like this role. So I applied for the head of recruitment, as it was then in the merged firm. It was a contested role. So there were two people in line for that role. So I had 2-hour interview, I think it was, with my boss. She'd actually changed, her role had actually moved from HRD to Q in the Barrow. Right. And then she was going to move into the HRD role in the newly merged CMS, CM&O. So there was her on the interview panel. There was a CMS partner, a Nabarro partner, and an Olswang partner. So absolutely terrifying. And I didn't make the same mistake as I had many years ago at Chorus. I made sure I prepped that process within an inch of my life, I think. I went in feeling quite confident, but also excited.
Because you wanted it. So you were really making sure that you were ready to tackle the interview ahead, I imagine.
Absolutely. And I was always honest about what I perceived were my potential limitations. I acknowledged in the interview process. Limitations is probably the wrong word. I think my areas for development. I kind of highlighted where I thought I needed to explore things in a bit more depth. And there were some areas that I weren't sure about that would relate to, obviously, the new strategy of a merged firm. Because when you're bringing a huge, three significant firms together into a huge beast, there's going to be a new strategy, and you've got to align the other strategies under that. So there were some unknowns for me, and I was always really honest about that. So yeah, and I was lucky. They decided at that time to go with me.
I love that, because also, you know, you've really put yourself out there. As you say, you were heavily pregnant at the time as well, but it just shows what sort of firm it is, that they're not thinking, oh my gosh, we're not going to have Becky here for the next year or however long your maternity leave is going to be. They're thinking, this is the right person for us, and Absolutely. We want to secure her. I think that is amazing. It's not, Absolutely. It's rare as well. It still is rare. I think that's really amazing from the firm.
And it was interesting. I think I had 12 weeks, which seems like a lot of time from when we merged to when I was due to go off on maternity leave. And that does seem like a lot of time, but we all know weeks can fly by. And I remember having a conversation with the senior partner at CMS, who's since retired, Penelope, saying, right, so I'm going to be going off. So this is a strategy I've put in place, and this is going to happen, and they're all going to know what they're doing, and possibly coming across as slightly neurotic because I felt this pressure. And then it became clear it was pressure I was putting on myself. Everyone was ready. Everyone knew what they were doing. And Penelope just turned to me and very graciously said, Becky, just go and enjoy your child, which was absolutely the right thing that I needed to hear then. And that kind of freed me up.
Yeah, which is great. So you went off on your maternity leave. I don't think you took a full 12 months, did you?
No, I took 8 months. I was due to take 9, but my cover, who was actually one of my team, we moved him up to cover my maternity leave. He decided he was going to move to New Zealand, and it was an amazing opportunity. So he was going to be leaving just before my maternity was due to come back. My maternity was due to end, and I was due to come back. And I thought about it, and if I'm honest, me personally, I was ready to go back. Archie, my son, who is now almost 7, I could see he needed something more. I think he was ready to go to nursery. So I made plans to go back. There were some things that I had signed up for, such as swimming lessons for Archie. And I had a conversation with my boss and sort of said, I'm not sure how this is all going to work out. And he's like, well, we can flex. We can flex around the edges. If you need to take that morning to go and do swimming with Archie, then drop him at nursery, work the rest of the day from home, you can do that. So I was working a hybrid pattern.
Way before.
Long before the pandemic, and hybrid working really came to light. I've always had that flexibility, which I've been really grateful for, because I think every parent knows that when you first put your child into nursery, oh gosh, it's like they come down with everything, and you're constantly getting calls from nursery. Can you come and get them? They're running a temperature, until their immune system kicks in.
And you're also a single parent as well, so you do have extra responsibility, don't you, as a parent? I know you don't necessarily have someone else able to step in when that's happening.
No, so yes, I didn't have any family living in London. I don't have any family living where we are at the moment, so I've not ever had support around me. And Archie hasn't always seen his dad. He doesn't see him at the moment, so it was pretty much down to me. So, at the risk of sounding a bit sycophantic, CMS has been like my family. Yeah. They've enabled me to have a career, but to also be a completely single parent as well.
I think that speaks volumes about the firm, and also about your tenacity as well. Mm-hmm. I think that comes through in buckets, doesn't it? So you've been developing and growing your role over the past 7 years, and one of the things that you've really tried to pull through there is your coaching, the mentoring, the sponsorship. And I know that you've more recently been studying for an accreditation, haven't you? Coaching accreditation for Maya Campbell. How important is that for you, for the firm? Is it for you personally?
So I have. Our head of L&D has been nagging me for a couple of years. I'm very lucky. I have great peer support, and she's always seen in me talent and had faith in my abilities, perhaps when I haven't had complete faith in my own. And she's been suggesting to me I should do the Mailer Campbell coaching accreditation for a while. Coaching played a big part of my role at PwC. So I spent time with director candidates and partner candidates in their process of promotion during my time there. And I guess I hadn't pursued Mailer Campbell before because I was scared.
It's a big commitment, isn't it? Very high quality.
Yeah. How was I going to fit learning in with a child, with a full-time job? I just couldn't see it. And our head of L&D was very much, have some exploratory chats with them. You know, you don't have to sign up for the program, just have some chats and see how you feel. And yeah, so I did meet with some of the senior leaders on the program, and it made me really excited. I think where I had resisted it in previous years, I was ready for something for me, something outside of CMS, but was related to CMS. Obviously, once my accreditation is finalised, I will be part of an internal panel of coaches. But something that was about my learning, my personal growth, my confidence, and it wasn't about being a mum as well. So quite selfish reasons for joining the programme.
No.
And I had my business panel yesterday, and I spoke to them about my objectives for joining the program, which was largely around building my confidence, enhancing my leadership capability. Yes, I wanted to be a great coach, but I really wanted my world to be broader. And also I wanted to be a better parent. That was one of my motivations and objectives for the program. And so, yes, I'm in the final stages, and hopefully in the coming months we'll be finalising accreditation. I think I've got about 10 more coaching hours to do, one book review and my reflective essay, and it's just been amazing. Again, most of the syndicates are groups of 3. I got approached by a syndicate of 6 that felt outside of my comfort zone. Right. So I started it.
Again, that's you putting your hand up, isn't it? And pushing yourself out there, which is brilliant. And I think, as you were saying there, I know you work incredibly hard. I know you're doing a lot of study and a lot of coaching. It takes a lot of time. You're obviously a mum. You're a great mum as well. And your son was also diagnosed around the same time with some neurodiverse issues, wasn't he? And that adds a different complexity onto everything that you're doing. So I think you're a bit of a super role model. I don't know how anyone could live up to what you're doing, Becky.
So Archie has quite a complex profile in that he has ASD, so the autism. He also has ADHD, the attention deficit, and development coordination delay. So that's his movement. So some people will know that as dyspraxia. So if you take sport, for example, sport can be quite complex and hard for Archie because the autism is he doesn't always process instructions like everyone else does. The attention deficit is trying to get him to sit down and listen to what you're saying can be quite challenging. And then his coordination is not where it should be in relation to his peers. So yeah, it was quite tough. We were going through diagnosis at the same time as starting the program, and also battling the local authority for additional support for Archie so he can access the curriculum. And I think Mailer Campbell was a real lifeline for me. I was able to talk to my syndicate, my tutors about what was going on. I mean, it probably took, as you know me quite well, it took me probably about a year to come to terms with his diagnosis. I think I went through other
emotions.
Emotions, patterns. What did I do wrong as a parent? Is this my fault? Should I have done something different? So it wasn't an easy journey. It did take me a long time, but Archie and I go from strength to strength in that I actually deploy some of my coaching techniques with Archie. Particularly one of the most inspiring authors I've read is Nancy Klein's Time to Think. So really creating an environment for Archie where he can openly talk about what he thinks, what he feels, what he wants to say. So a lot of the time I'm asking him questions, giving him a voice. And that goes back to the earlier point about really making sure I'm listening. I can't do that if I'm on the phone, because he's smart and he clocks it. He's like, "Mummy, you're not listening to me."
I love that. Call out your mum.
Yeah, making time, really making time to make sure I'm hearing him. And that's flowed into one of my practice clients, is a charity, Resources for Autism, and they do amazing work. So it's a charity that even when my accreditation is finished, and I hope to stay with the organisation, continuing to support their work and coaching individuals within that organisation has been really rewarding. I deliberately sought clients outside of my sector because, again, I wanted a different perspective.
That's amazing. And I think, I think you're amazing anyway. But I think the dedication that you've shown to all aspects of your life, again, goes back into that value system, doesn't it? That, mum and dad installed in you from a young age, and really wanting to make sure that you're bringing your best self all the time, whether it's work, whether it's with your coaching, whether it's with your son, whether it's with your friendship group. And I think that you always, keep that very real, which is amazing. And so what would you say the biggest challenges at the moment within law firms for talent acquisition, heads of talent acquisition like yourself?
I think it's probably one of the challenges is that the market has been quite volatile. We've had quite a lot of uncertainty in the external market. We had the pandemic, then there's been political unrest. Yeah. We've had quite a number of prime ministers, and I don't want to get into politics on this, but we're now facing a general election, and all of that uncertainty impacts on sort of the environment that you're operating in for organizations. So one of the challenges that we have as a talent acquisition team is being able to dial it up and dial it down. You have to be able to respond really quickly to fluctuations in the market. So that involves my team being really abreast of what's going on, maintaining really good relationships with our suppliers, and also managing the business's expectations in a really realistic way. As we've all seen, there's lots of war for talent in law firms. There's salary hikes at NQ rates, which always baffles me in some ways. So there's this massive pressure on that. One of the things that I like about CMS is we're our own firm. We don't just follow everybody else. We hold our own space. And I really value that, because I think sometimes you have to be able to hold a line when you just see salaries escalating and escalating. It just gets ridiculous. I think there's a lot of pressure on hybrid working right now. It is in the top 2 questions that most candidates will ask: what is your hybrid working policy? And I can't blame candidates for that. I could not do my role without hybrid working. I know there'll be partners out there who perhaps didn't always have the opportunity to spend as much time with their children as they did before the pandemic. And, in the pandemic, we've all got to spend some more time at home. I'm sure you did.
Yeah.
And people don't want to give that up. So I think if you're going to retain that competitive edge, you've really got to think about what your approach to hybrid is.
I think that's so true. I talk to a lot of people, as you know, within professional services firms, and I would say it's always one of the questions they ask me: what are other people doing that's working well? So not just to find out what other people are doing, but how can they improve themselves? And it goes back to this whole conversation around having the ability for people to learn from other people, for collaboration. It's a huge, challenging topic, but I think you're right that people do like some form of flexibility, and it's difficult to imagine, as you were saying there, having to be in London 5 days a week. Well, that's going to be impossible, isn't it? So there's got to be an answer, or there's got to be a way of finding a happy medium at times.
Absolutely. And it shouldn't just be about time in the office. I say to my team, if you're just going to go in the office and sit at your desk and do emails, that's pointless.
Presenteeism, isn't it? Yeah.
whilst there is an expectation that half my team's time will be sort of out and about, that's not necessarily office. That might be meeting with suppliers. It might be catching up with coffee for a recruitment consultant. It might be for the emerging talent teams, spending some time at ULaw. Yes, there will be some time in the office, but I'm not defining that because we're in an organization and in an area where relationships are everything, and those relationships happen everywhere, not just within whatever office you're based.
Yeah,
so
very, very good point. And what about words of wisdom from you for future generations, or even to Becky when she was thinking she might become an archaeologist?
I think I've looked at myself lately over the last few weeks as I've prepared for my Mailer Campbell business panel. And I think there's something about being brave, having courage, take yourself out of the comfort zone. Might not work out, but it doesn't matter. There will be some learning along the way, and it might work out to be one of the best things that you have ever done. Some of the things that I've put my hand up for and thought, oh my gosh, what am I doing, have turned out to be the best opportunities for me. And for me, there's something about trying it on. There's a great author, Herminia Ibarra, who talks about working identity. And she talks about trying things on. And there's a theme and feeling in her book for me around being brave. And so I think anyone starting out in their career, try stuff on. Yeah. See if it fits, experiment. And that's not even for people starting out in their career. I've done a lot of experimenting the last year. People are living for longer these days. They're working for longer. So as you said, there will be different iterations of career phases. So trying to have fun with that as well.
Embrace it. I love that. Well, I have to say thank you so much for your time today, Becky.
It's been a pleasure.
Oh, it's been so interesting. I love the fact that you were saying before about the feedback element as well, is, really get people to give you constructive feedback so that you can enable yourself to keep developing. And then obviously, what you've done with paying it forward with the coaching, the mentoring, the sponsorship. Absolutely. And also I know that, you're a very passionate advocate of EDI, which is something that is embedded in you in the way that you operate and work in your firm as well. So, so many takeaways today from you. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.